Well, on to today's webinar from the Open Group, which today is being brought to you by Orbis Software, which is a member of the Open Group. Before I hand over to our presenter to start the presentation, I'd just like to go over a few housekeeping issues just to keep the event moving forward smoothly. Firstly, we would encourage you to ask questions. That is one of the main objectives of bringing these events to you. The best way to submit a question is to use the text Q facility in the bottom of your screen. Do submit your question in there, just write it in, and if you can address it to all, that way everyone gets to see the questions that are being asked. And we will answer the questions at the end of the event. This event is also being recorded, so if for any reason you have to leave early, or if you experience any local technical problems, the full recording of this event will be available from tomorrow, and you will get an email with necessary link to where you can access that recording. With that covered, I'd just like to hand over to Lou and ask Lou to start his presentation. Lou.
Welcome to everybody to today's presentation. I'm going to discuss a topic that I've been involved with for a while, and that's with TOGAF 9. And what deliverables do you create during your TOGAF project? Now, I think most of you who've been working with projects in that space, always a question was, how do you get the success of your enterprise architecture project? We tend to go a lot of detail trying to know architecture project as a separate entity, and I think that's where architects tend go into this white tower or ivory tower kind of complex of thinking about project as the ultimate end goal. My experience, what I found now is that the best way to measure the success of your architecture project is by measuring the implementation project success. So if you have multiple implementation projects that do your architecture continuously, your architecture was a success and that has been followed. I've got a bit of when it comes to environments. I would like to be able to work in an environment where I've got flow-driven architecture, and what I mean by that is an environment where my project, I've got staff members to do all the little bits. We find mostly I'm working in environments where we follow the TOGAF methodology, and if it's a workflow-driven approach that we follow, it means that we allocated resources to different roles. We've got rating models in place. We've got we measure the project to a very low level of detail. It's to me a very idealistic way of looking at it, and organizations that can't afford this kind of heavy architecture input. And I'm seeing more and more organizations who try to use architecture as a way of leveraging the organization's internal needs and find a way of that architecture project work for them. And environments like that where you've got little structure, or architecture is new, we use a model called a publish and subscribe model. We have different architectures in organizations being executed simultaneously. The architecture method is not as strictly implemented as we would have in an environment where you've got a very structured approach to it. And in this case, we now use the publish and subscribe model. The intent out of that is then for architecture deliverables during these phases that we submitted to a review committee or an architecture board or a government gate. There's different names that people call these oversight committees to ensure that architecture work that's been done is aligned across the organization, and as then any project that will go forward and use that architecture that in the projects to have a way engaging the architects. So the print subscribe approach is formal. It's a fit model. Different architectures being developed in different parts of the organization. We're doing the same process, but the process is not embedded in a tool set that's very strictly managed. And the second model, obviously, a subscribe model, where a lot of organizations are growing, especially small organizations, that are trying to leverage the architecture approach, but without the dedicated resources or structures in place to make it work. Now, looking in this kind of environment where you have a structure and people and process in place, the idea there is to identify the key deliverables out of each different phase of the project, and by managing those deliverables, you tend to get the quality of the project up to make sure it's also usable going forward. In my case, I'll get to this a bit later, but I found that the Prince2 project methodology condenses very well to the of architecture approach, where when you combine the TOGAF architecture method with the Prince2 methodology, you tend to be focused on products that you deliver. Most to me equates very much to the deliverables that I can manage through the life cycle. What I do have here is a diagram showing the architecture. What I've got here is a diagram showing the architecture project cycle. I think all the architecture projects do through. So what we do is we have put the business planning and input in my architecture cycle, and then I start with my project initiation. Now, if I can equate this to you back to the TOGAF architecture method, then when I speak about the project initiation, I'm into the TOGAF phase A. Initiation is where I get my project plans in place, I set the scope of the architecture effort, and I get the right kind of sign-off. I get to an architecture development cycle where I do architecture content, making sure I speak to the stakeholders to find the current environment, the top environment, and to identify the set of requirements that I fulfill to achieve my total environment. And then I go through a transition planning cycle, and in TOGAF terminology, which means phase E and phase F. And at phase E and phase F, what I do is I focus on understanding the requirements for the solutions teams to go forward, package my architecture in the correct seat to be able to understand how I achieve my targets going through a quarterly or a yearly cycle. Transition planning, very important part of it, because that is what that feeds into your solutions development life cycle, or it can also feed into your procurement or your outsourcing life cycle, depending what initiative was about, what your architecture results will be. If it is something that you want to go and develop, or it's an environment where you're going to be doing a lot of procurement or outsourcing. So that's the context for where I position the 8 deliverables that you need. And I got to say that it's 8 deliverables. It's not because I was a magic number. It just worked out that working through the TOGAF documentation, I realized that on the projects that I've been involved with in the previous projects before I used TOGAF, all tend to there was a recurring theme that of certain components that you have to have to communicate and to manage your environment. So the 8 deliverables specified on the side here is all from the TOGAF documentation. So I thought it might be easier if I relate all these topics that I speak about back to the TOGAF standard, so that allow the people, or you actually listening at the moment, to be able to have a reference point. And And what you find in your own organization is, if you're using a different methodology, if you're using, if you're coming from a strong project management background, and in architecture using different frameworks, you would have the similar kind of deliverables defined. Maybe different words, but I'm sure that you have the same kind of deliverables that you defined that you have available. To make it easy, I just on the next slide here, I've just put the website where it's available. So go to TOGAF.info. For whatever you doesn't know that, it's a very useful resource to be able to read the TOGAF or the 9.1 standard online, as well as a bit of resources that's available on the open group for you to make the best of your TOGAF investment. So on this website, what I would suggest that you do is you go to the link that talks about the templates. It says TOGAF 9 templates, an example. Now in those templates, it's a zip file that you download. In there's the whole set of TOGAF principles and documents that's available. So if you don't want that, please download it from there. And that's where I based my work going forward. It's based on these templates, and I think it was a great extension to the TOGAF standard having that available. Looking at the first phase of the project, architecture project initiation. And this is the part of where you are engaging the stakeholders to understand what is the need for this architecture project. Sometimes I think we do an architecture initiative without proper understanding the requirement of the business. And it's quite easy to say, but it's easily available. So I've been in environments where I've got 6 strategy packs from different people. I've got output from different stakeholders, and if you don't have a mechanism available to translate those different strategies and outcomes into a business case that goes forward, then your project's really in trouble. And the standard answer is, okay, start along with the project, class together, let's start the project, and while we do the project, we'll business case done as we go forward. Unfortunately, it doesn't work really in an environment where there's a tight budget, and I've seen it happen in a few large organizations where there's enough project available for people to redo work, but in an environment that we're facing these days with economic conditions, you have to properly before you go on. And that you're able to agree a business case with a sponsor, get the appropriate amount of funding before you go forward. So that's the purpose of what I see as being that needs to happen in the project initiation phase. And in that phase, as I said, you go to TOGAF and you go through TOGAF phase A, and a bit of prelim phase in the TOGAF methodology. You would define the steps, where you put out on what to follow, how to do this. But going in the same environment, I would say that the first thing that I do, and now these days, that I create for myself a document of my understanding of the business. TOGAF do have content available, business principles, goals, and others. Now that document allows you to unpack the different inputs you get from business, and what you basically do is you describe in the document your understanding of the context of this problem. And this is not the business case that you will deliver back to the business at the end of the day. This is a document that captures the understanding of the business environment, the principles of design, that you have to comply with when you're looking at the business. We also here at the industry drivers, what is happening in the industry, and all these inputs will shape the way that you tackle your architecture project. Some it's based on our experiences, and if you get new to an environment, if you're an architect that's been working in the same organization for a very long time, then assume this document is not necessary for you because you've been embedded in this organization, you would understand the feel for the organization. But a person who comes in with little or no background in the organization and you're asked to tackle an architecture project, my first thing is to always go back to a document like this to reflect back to the business my understanding. And surprised how many questions a document like this will earth, but you'll find is that there's sometimes a misalignment between the business units as well of exactly what they mean. So when we are around the table or when we have our own discussions with stakeholders, then the different picture that arises when we all this together in one place. So to me, it's an important document for the architect to reflect back to the business of what is his understanding of the environment. So this is the first thing I normally do on a pitch to get the understanding right. Important years I've just mentioned here, as you'll note on the side, a group that's been available for a few years now, which is Enterprise Architecture Strategy from Russell and Robinson. I've got a little link in there as well. Book there is op models that they describe, and as well, one of the techniques that I use is I put a bit of operating model together as my understanding of the business. But that's a discussion on its own. Just as a side note there for you to say that something useful to go and read when you talk about this document. And in first project initiation, it's important to me is the architect vision. And so much for yourself this time around, because the architect vision is, for the architect, what I found useful here is for me to assist my sponsor, the person who sponsors the project, to communicate the value of the project to his peers or to the rest of the organization. For me, this document plays a role of a change agent. So empower the business sponsor that I'm having at the moment. I'm empowering that business user with the right information on the right level, so that he can then explain the project to his peers and to start selling this to the rest of the organization. As an architect, you're focusing on the technical components going forward, and your interaction in trying to sell the project from a business case perspective is not really that great. So, especially if you're a small organization, with thinly spread in the organization, you have a mix of players at the beginning to get it across. For that, this vision document is important. This vision as summary for the rest of the project is also included in the statement of architecture work. I'll speak about this now. Still, I think it's a good document in TOGAF, but my own personal experience, what I've found is that I would go through the template available from the open group, read the template, I'll fill in the different components, and then I'll translate this document into a PowerPoint slide. I think PowerPoint in most organizations is an easy medium to communicate, especially for the type of people that you're trying to address this to. Architecture principles, not really a document, although you'll find it in there's a TOGAF where you fill in a document. I think this is something that we just have to agree on. If you have a good architecture practice in place already, settled values and principles and design principles in place, then it's great. Then you don't have to spend a lot of time on this. You just need to make sure that the principles are aligned with your project. But you work in an environment where at the moment it's not really organized, where you've got your project is going to be there, and there's no very nice central architecture function already. You still do architecture and you still add value. But importantly, that during this first phase of the project, that you agree on the architecture principles that you'll be following. The principles is so very much needs to be with that first document where we speak about the business principles and business vision. We want to make sure that our design principles that's coming forward is with the way that the business is going to operate. There's not this can sometimes seem like a real exercise, but I see that if you don't do it correctly, you end up with a set of principles on a post on the wall. It's not advancing your case. So I've added principles here because I think it's a good mechanism or we need to use within the project itself at the level, because if you have to get the set of principles out for people to communicate and understand on. But to me, this is that will be more consumed by the project team and the stakeholders you will interview in the next phases. So if you want to make this work, I think the important thing is to say that this is a more internally focused document to start off with. At the time experience now, to make sure that your architects all align and they're thinking for when they actually do the business. And find that there's a set of principles available from TOGAF that you can use as a starting point. I find them useful as a good conversation opener. So if you just to think what is a good principle or one principle that I can use and communicate with, it's really good to go to the Open Group website, take an info, open up in there, you'll see this, you can read TOGAF mine online, and I've added the link there for you. Chapter 23, this is a set of principles available. But this is a starting point to, I would say, go and select 3 principles, see what it looks like, see how they relate back to your business. Are you going to be working on a project that's very much service orientated? Are you trying to focus on an environment where data is a very key environment, or you're working in an environment where you're working with a lot of other stakeholders, and maybe it's a case of maybe something in the application and design side that you want to emphasize. There's principles for all these areas, and it's just for you to be able to select the right principles to make sure that your project is really going to reflect the vision of the organization. So that's why I'm saying this is important deliverable. I think we came to the crucial principle in TOGAF. It's open for architectural work. And I think this is one of those documents that it must be. It's called the Statement of Architectural Work in TOGAF. But the way I look at this is your key project document. So for managing your project, from understanding your stakeholders, for understanding what you're going to do, it also encapsulates the change process within the project. If I would say this is the one document that's going to be crucial to make a successful project, then this is a good thing. It is supposed to be in contract to you and business about what the project is going to be all about. And I not have a very technical background. He's developing this is a developer, and project management to me was not a word that I like to use. And especially this level where you start putting down the obvious things, making sure that your way of communicating with business didn't really make a lot of sense to me, because I thought let's go in and we'll do the work and we'll get it over with, and we'll, as we go through the process, we'll hammer it right as we go forward. it took me a while to realize the value of having good defined plan up front with the scope, with the mind in place. And it's in an organization where you do not follow a very strict process or where your process is not well defined. You find a way of scoping the piece of work that you do at the moment. Architecture can conversely from a 6-week engagement to a 3-year engagement as the scope increases with every project you uncover. Because the organization out there that's so managed, so well defined that there's everything known. So you tackle an officer project, you always open up a can of worms, and it can take you into different directions. And the only way for you to make sure that you contain your scope is by a proper statement of architectural work in place, and making sure that any changes to the scope of the work go through a proper change process that is also defined in the end. And that you can use this document in conjunction with your project management office. So I would say that if you are an organization that does not do architecture in a structured manner, at least you must have a project management office available in the organization. It will be very difficult to do proper architecture on your own if there's no project office to manage the normal project initiatives within the organization. So I'm assuming that you have at least a structure in place for the project office, and linking the statement of office to that office gives you a structure you require to successfully execute the project going forward. So this is a critical document to have. That I think you have to have available. It's a closing of the project initiation. So those are the 4 documents that to require for project initiation. One communicating with the business, one for communicating with the project office, making sure that the project is in mind, one for internal to organization itself. Final one is for you to be able to resume your project in the context of a big organization. Now, the development is really the core of the following initiative. So we are performing a project. The most of the people I speak to, if I speak to an architect, top of mind he says that if I ask you what are you doing, he starts doing kind of models of these buildings. So doing an analysis, designs, looking at reference architectures, that is the core of the work of what architects themselves see themselves doing. And important then, as an architect, to not only know how to connect all the different building blocks from the organization and to define the new building blocks that you want to put in place or the new capabilities you want in place, but also need to communicate that work through the right stakeholders. And the way to do that is through having a proper documentation available so that you show the impact of your change into this organization. So that's why during this cycle, I know this is the largest cycle of the 3, that we have identified 2 documents. It's crucial for developing. The first is the architect definition document. The architect definition gives me a quantitative view of environment, of the requirements I have, and gives me a way of communicating with different stakeholders in the organization. If I'm, for example, in a banking environment, and I'm talking to the staff that is responsible for opening a new bank account. So looking at processes, looking at the way we're doing it currently, the way we're doing it in the future. An architect, I will go and I will use my own techniques to elicit the kind of requirements. I would model the views that I see from the current environment, how it works. I might use something like the business process modelization. I might Archimate. I might use UML. I might use use cases as a way of capturing that information from the stakeholders. I would then start planning on how it will look in the future. Again, I'll have some interviews with stakeholders about what they see the future changes need to look like. I'll go to reference architectures, the industry. I'll use the IBM, IFW. I might use the banking industry framework, Bain. So there's a range of reference architectures that I might use to come up with the future process or the future model that I see happen. And then as a result of that, I need to understand the gap. What is going to be the difference between the current and the future? And every time, as I do current environment and I do the future environment, different environments, I must verify my thinking with the stakeholders. And I do that is I have to find an agreement for them to sign off on. So I myself, as I said, I use the architecture repository for the different views using different models. But those models I need to extract from the repository again, put them in a format that is accessible to the kind of stakeholders I'm talking to. That's where the view comes in. We talk about views and viewpoints. And a bigger discussion for later. But in essence, what I'm trying to say is that those different views you want to capture into a formal delivery document where you can get sign-off as a governance point, so to ensure that you've covered all the components. Again, this is important if in an environment where you have got different architecture teams running at the same time, working on a project basis without very structured process to follow. But that model, you want to at least a governance structure in place. And to the end of this phase, or there might be different cycles in this phase, you want this definition document to be signed off by stakeholders and then submitted to the governance committee to ensure that that you just follow proper procedures in coming up with a future architecture. This definition in terms of TOGAF, looking about phase B of TOGAF, the business architecture, phase C, the solutions architecture, we're looking at applications and data, and then also then phase D, we're looking at the technology architecture environment. We can also extend this into phase E of TOGAF, do the consolidation, the integration architecture. But our main 3 points is phase B, C, and D of TOGAF, where this is the prime rules. Equivalent to the definition document that I've seen here, as I said, this document I'm going to use for communicating back to my stakeholders, the people that give information, my subject matter experts. I communicate to them. But then I also have to find a way of communicating with the development team or the implementation team going forward. And that's the document. So as an aside here, at the bottom of the screen is to see that I've got a link in there that talks to the Archimate notation, which gives a set of viewpoints to use this definition document. I'm getting excited about Archimate. It is on its way. Some really nice extensions to it that I can see it's going to make a big difference in the future of architecture. This document, the architecture requirement specification, is going to be a crucial document, not an on project, but going to be a crucial document going forward. It's not about communicating with your implementation teams, because documentation on this document will specify the gaps you've identified between your current environment and your future environment. But adding to those gaps you've identified, plus all the assumptions you're making, everything becomes requirements that communicate with the implementation teams, and you'll also be able to ensure that your communication with your implementation teams are of such a good quality that they can off as you go through the implementation project to ensure that the implementation aligns with your architecture. And this is a very, very important document for communication back to those implementation team members. So this is we keep it going for that. And again, nice reference that was unfortunately taken out of TOGAF was their template. Now, we've got the requirement specification, as I say here, and if you go to the TOGAF info site, you'll find that you'll find a document called Architecture Requirement Specification. The one that I'm more excited about is the Volet template available. It's from the Atlantic Systems Guild. It's been around for a lot of years, and these guys specialize in requirements management as a discipline. And I think there's a very good overlap with the stuff that TOGAF is doing at the moment. But the template available from Volet, I think is very good. Unfortunately, for the Volet template, I think it's $50 a moment you have to pay to get a copy. But it might be worthwhile if you're going to be looking at time. It might just be worthwhile to go and get a copy for yourself. So those are the only two documents we're going to be doing the development phase. As I said, we're going into different phases. It's a list of things that happen. So if you want information on that, I would suggest going to TOGAF phase B, C, and D as a bit of a background to that. End up with the transition planning. So assuming at this stage that most of the work has been done, you've the project plans, you've gathered all the information, when you look at transition planning, have reached the point in the project where you understand the gaps, you understand how you want to fill those gaps going forward. And now it's an important part is for you to start looking at how to transition from our current environment to the future environment. And this is where the architect team just to give input. And sometimes as architects we are so excited about the we're doing and don't really listen to the rest of the organization when it comes to implementation. That's to me the difficult part of all of the projects is we now need to coordinate with project managers to make sure that the implementation suggestions that come from the architecture is implementable. And there's some other constraints from a financial, political environment that sometimes pop up at this stage of the project, which make it really, really difficult to implement the architecture as we would like initially. The green planning is getting those contracts and documents in place to the architecture project to be sustainable or being implemented going forward. We are start looking at the value realization. There's a point I'm trying to make at the bottom here is that your solutions development team must first implement the architecture before the organization will receive the benefit of your architectural work. So this comes back to what I said in the beginning of this presentation of how do you measure the success of your architecture? And it's only going to be successful if your implementation teams are doing architecture. If they forward and they do project work and they're not taking the architecture in consideration, then it's a wasted effort. And that's actually when architecture becomes an expense, not an asset, not something that's reusable in projects going forward. Now, there's two documents that I'm going to focus on here. The first is the transition architecture document or template, and the template contains different components, including the visual project layout, and what TOGAF calls work packages. And other terms, a work package can be translated into mean an individual project that kicks off. And also those project plans has been defined in the transition architecture. And what we try to do with transition architectures is trying to understand what it would take to immediately build the capabilities within the organization. Say for my discussions with my stakeholders, I've got a baseline environment. I target architecture work that specifies the activities or the processes or the systems that I have in place at a certain point in time. That might be 3 years in the future. But during that period, I can't just have one big project and add no value to the organization. So I must build my implementation to eventually add into the organization as we go forward. And transition planning is very important, and using the concept of transition architecture is important, because what we'll do is we'll have a future vision in the year 2011. In 2011, we have an idea what the world will look like 5 years from now. But if we look to each other next to the same time, that picture of the world would have changed. We would have now looked at the world and said, but if we are at the end of the 2012, a world going forward, we say, but what we saw in 2011 is not the moment. We have to adjust our planning and to adjust our architecture as we go forward. And adjusting the architecture, if you have no simple point to go to fall back on, is very, very difficult. So that's important to have a transition architecture defined per quarter, per year, depending on the kind of environment you're working with, and having that as a baseline, so that you can increase, change your future state as required, or as you go to implementation, and if your state changes, you would then be in a much better position to make that in a more structured manner. Now, I'm trying to say a lot of things in a very short time, but transition architecture's capabilities, and transition planning is crucial. It needs a bigger discussion, but for that, it's important to have a document that documents your thinking as of today. So when you look back at this a year from now, understand what was the thinking, what was the future, what it looked like, and what was implementation, and what's been reached within this year. And actually the replanning, which will happen as a matter of running a business, then at least know what decisions were made and why. So this is an important document to have and then lastly, as part of the transition planning, we have to do the implementation and migration plan as well. Very closely related back to the transition architecture, but implementation and migration plan is that schedule that will allow us to implement the transition architecture. And it comes down to the time, costing of resources, the milestones, and initially by the architecture team in conjunction with the management teams. But I think must be by the project office going forward. And that's why I put this in red here to say that this is a communication tool between the sponsor of the project, the architecture team, and the implementation team. And that needs to stay a communication tool for as long as the implementation lasts, so that when any changes to the implementation environment, we can go through the change process and everybody is on board on how this will affect the migration going forward, of how this changes to the environment will affect the architecture that is defined. If you don't have this communication in place, it's going to be very, very difficult for you to manage the implementation of your architecture to a successful conclusion. And that leads to the last point I want to make, and that implementation then requires the architect to play a different role. At the end of transition architecture, the architect was involved hands-on on the project. But as you go forward, you have to have a governing structure in place to be able to have the discussions we're talking about. There's no good opportunity that you have to use this transition architecture and implementation and migration plan as a communication document. How do I put the rest of the organization? For that, you proper governance in place. And I know that if you're coming out of a financial background, you have everything signed, sealed, sorted. It's a lot of environments, and especially a very strong IT environment, it's only now picking up as something that's important, especially if we're making these kind of complex environments. Now, my personal preference is for COVID. COVID 4.1 is a current one that's out there, that's on fire. I've been with COVID 5 now for a while. I think 5 is going to be a big step forward. And though as an architect, I won't call myself an expert in many of these areas. I think COVID in such a way that gives the architect enough guidance on how to interact or understand the environment where the architecture will be implemented, to know how to interact with that environment and how to ensure that you can find a mechanism to make your architecture be implementable by the organization. So as I've worked through the station, two assumptions I'm making at the moment that I didn't expressly state. The one there was that you have to have a project management framework in place before an architecture effort. And the second one is that you have to have a governed or managed environment. So if you're using COBIT or ITIL or any framework with how you to capture changes in your operational environment, it must be available before installing a successful architecture project. On my side, any questions, Simon?
Lou, great. Many thanks for that. So if you have any questions now, please do write them in the QA text facility and address them to all, and we can answer those for you. While we're waiting for people to submit some questions, I did notice a question a little bit earlier was sent in asking about the difference between TOGAF 9 and TOGAF 9.1. I wonder if you're in a position maybe just to highlight some of the top-level differences.
It's 9.1 is very much an update that's clarifying some of the concepts in TOGAF. So between 9.1, there's no new concepts that was introduced. It's a wording that was updated and clarified and pulled right. There were also some inconsistencies in TOGAF. Some of the definitions in TOGAF in different chapters didn't tie up with each other. That was fixed. The issues with the content framework, where some of the content framework concepts that was in the diagrams weren't probably aligned, and that was also redone. And then there was some information or some content in TOGAF 9 that was redundant. One example would be, for example, the building block statement that was removed, the building block example, because I think that's a bit of archaic at the moment. But me, I would say the biggest change that came through was the chapter on SOA. Again, it's the SOA chapter in TOGAF 9 was based on work from the SOA work group and the open group that was a bit old, but it was the work that was done since TOGAF was launched in 2009 has been this. And I must say that my biggest reason for why I would use TOGAF 9.1 as a document for reference is the SOA chapter. That is, for the first time I think TOGAF and SOA is explored together, and you've got a style of doing architecture that's well described in TOGAF 9.1. But for the book, even the people that haven't written the TOGAF 9 exam, they want to keep writing it very, very much the same. So there's no significant difference between the two, except for the SOA chapter.
Lou, thanks very much for that. Well, we're still waiting for some questions to come in at the moment, Lou. So I'm on the text facility at the moment. I was just going to make one final request. So if you have any questions, please can you write them in the QA text facility, and then we can see if we can address those for you.
And the last point on my side is that if you want to know something more about TOGAF 9.1 or about this presentation, the WhatsApp available for download as well from the Orbit website. So it might be guys from that side.
Yeah, I see that Tim put the URL up there a little bit earlier, so hopefully people have noticed that and made a note of it. It doesn't look like we're going to get any more questions at the moment, so I think this would be an appropriate time to end the event. Lou, I'd like to thank you for your time and for the informative presentation. I would like to thank everyone else for attending today, and please do keep an eye out on the Open Group webinar schedule page, because we have at least another 7 events planned between now and the end of February. So, Lou, many thanks for your time today, and thanks for giving that presentation. And I'll do the presentation now. Thank you, Lou.